Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm super excited to be here in part because it's snowing in Seattle and I can escape the dangerous driving, but more importantly, so I can spend the week with customers and partners like yourself. My name is Mohit. I'm Senior Manager of PM for Amplify, as well as a couple of other products, AppSync and Device Farm. And I'm going to be co-presenting with Abdullah, who's on my team. So Abdullah, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, Mohit. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Abdullah, and I'm a product manager on the Amplify team, specifically focusing on the Amplify Flutter and JavaScript libraries.
All right. We have a packed agenda today. We're going to cover really briefly a bit of context on the state of the web and mobile development industry and feedback we hear from customers like yourself. We'll also do a quick overview of why and what is Amplify. But then we're going to actually be spending the bulk of our time actually building a restaurant delivery platform, including both a web application as well as a cross-platform application, a cross-platform Flutter application. As we do that, we're going to highlight specifically the new features in Amplify that we've launched over the last couple weeks to last couple months. So we'll give special attention to those. And we're also going to weave in how customers are using Amplify. And finally, when we're all done, we'll spend a few minutes walking through the underlying architecture that got created in customers' accounts. So underneath, you'll see that things like AppSync, S3, Lambda, DynamoDB got provisioned as we went through the steps in this presentation today. All right, so we're going to kick off with a couple poll questions, just so Abdullah and I know who we're talking to today. You can kind of participate in this poll either by using that QR code, or you can go into your mobile application and check the live polling section. So I'll take about 20 to 30 seconds for you to vote, and then we'll check in on the results. And I'll read what's being asked at the same time. We're trying to identify what kind of developers we're talking to. Are you front end? Are you back end? Are you full stack, which is some hybrid of front end or back end? And I don't imagine to find too many, but if you're not a developer, I guess that's relevant to know as well. All right. I think we can go ahead and check the results. Wow. Okay. Full stack by far is number one, so you're in the right place. We have an equal mix of back-end and front-end and a few not developers. Well, hopefully this talk can inspire you to become a developer. All right, back to the slides. So just really briefly, here's some of the things we hear from front-end and full-stack developers. You're being asked to do a lot more, especially in this environment, to do a lot more with less. And that means pressure to get to market quickly, but in getting to market quickly, it means no one-way doors, like engineering for the future. At the same time, you're being asked to deliver great experience. That means supporting multiple devices and form factors. It means modern look and feel, and it means differentiated features that stand out from the crowd. And of course, the end result needs to be production ready. You don't want to become a Wall Street Journal article, well, at least in a bad way. And then, as a result, we're seeing three kinds of technical trends emerge. The one is demand for full-stack development solutions that allow you to harness the best of device and cloud to deliver features like location tracking, AI/ML, data. Like, really, these features span device and cloud, and there's demand for solutions that bring these things together. Second, for web developers specifically, we're seeing web developers really push the boundaries of what's possible, leveraging device capabilities, emerging browser standards to really create app experiences that are approaching truly native experiences. We're also seeing web developers leverage device and cloud for these kind of hybrid scenarios. So, for example, rendering, using a mix of rendering on the cloud, mix of rendering on the device to optimize initial load times versus interactivity that you can get via JavaScript bundles. And we'll talk a lot about that in this talk. And then finally, for developers who do want that truly native experience, we're seeing continued momentum with cross-platform. And what that means specifically is one code base that can target a bunch of platforms: iOS, Android, web, and desktop. Flutter has really gained momentum the past year. Flutter is a cross-platform framework that allows you to do just that. React Native continues to have a lot of momentum, especially among web and JavaScript developers looking to do native. And even the vendors themselves, like Apple, have introduced cross-platform development. So now with one Swift-based code base, you can target iOS, watchOS, you can target desktop from a single code base. So with that, we'll tee up our second and final polling question. When we talk about these app development approaches, just curious to see what kind of mix we have in the audience. So again, take about 20 to 30 seconds. Curious to see if we have web developers here, native mobile developers are using iOS and Android kind of tool chain natively, or cross-platform. And I guess we should have had all of the above or something like that. That's a miss on our part. But feel free to vote none if that's the answer. Okay, we'll take another 10 seconds or so. All right, let's check out the results. Okay, yeah, web dominates, so, and then cross-platform is second. Okay, so you're in luck. Our talk is basically those two. It's web and cross-platform, so you guys are in luck. All right, so now let's actually dive into the content. So why Amplify? We built Amplify very succinctly to make it easy for front-end developers to build full-stack applications. And then what exactly is Amplify? And I like to explain it less from the perspective of, what slide is on, sorry. Yep. I like to explain it less from the perspective of what the products are, but what it lets you accomplish. So the first use case is around building backends. And we have a combination of a visual tool, which is called Amplify Studio, and a command line tool, which is called Amplify CLI, which allow you to build an AWS backend. And the key distinction from this versus other kind of infrastructure as a code tools is there's really a focus on use cases. So you're building auth, you're building data, right? You're building use cases, and underneath what's happening is AWS services get provisioned for you. The next set of capabilities are around web specifically. So we have capabilities for building app UI, which we're going to demo in this talk. And once you've built your app, we have capabilities, a fully managed service for actually hosting that resulting application. And then finally, we have capabilities around connecting your application, whether you're a cross-plat or a web developer, to that backend. And a key thing to keep in mind here is these tools can be used together, and they're designed to work together really well, but they can be used on their own as well. So we have a lot of customers, for example, using Amplify Hosting and nothing else Amplify. That's totally fine. We have other customers maybe using the Amplify libraries and UI components, but they've built their backend using some other tooling like CDK. And that's totally fine. So these tools can be used together, or they can be used on their own. Both approaches totally fine. All right, so that's, I think, our preamble. So let's actually get started building. And just to really touch on what we're going to build before you see it, we're going to build, as I mentioned, a food delivery platform with two applications. The first app is going to be a web application for customers to browse menu items and place orders. That's going to be a Next.js application. If you don't know what Next.js is yet, don't worry. We'll kind of go into that as we build out the app. For now, you can just, it's a web application. And then we're going to build a mobile application for drivers. So this allows drivers to receive and deliver orders. And this is going to be a cross-platform application using Flutter. Same thing here. If you don't yet know what Flutter is, no problem. We'll kind of go through that. Okay, so with that, Abdullah and I are going to play the role of a two-person dev team. He's going to build out the backend, and then I'll come back on stage later to build out the web app.
Awesome. Thank you, Mohit. All right, and to further elaborate on what Mohit was saying for building a backend, as he's mentioned, you have the ability to be able to build the backend that you need either through using the terminal with our command line tools, or visually by going to the AWS console. And the way that Amplify allows you to provision resources, you're able to build your resources that you need based on the use cases that your app actually needs. So for example, if you need authentication or API or file storage, Amplify provisions all of the necessary resources that you need for those specific use cases. And lastly, with Amplify, you have the ability to model the data that you need. And you can do that using a GraphQL schema. And using that GraphQL schema, you have the ability to add powerful authorization rule to allow you to granularly control access to your data. We've talked to a lot of developers about how they think about their development lifecycle. And almost half of developers have said to us that they prefer to actually start thinking about how their data looks like before they actually write a single line of code. And for that, we've leaned very heavily on the use of GraphQL, since it allows a developer to be able to set up their GraphQL schema. And then, using that schema, we can generate all of the necessary resources that a developer needs to enable their use cases. And then another benefit of GraphQL as well is that as a front-end developer, you can use a single endpoint for you to be able to get all of the data that you need back and forth. And you don't need to create multiple endpoints if you have varying use cases where you need different types or different returned attributes that come back from your GraphQL backend. And for our food delivery platform, I've started off with an initial model, which is the restaurant model. And as you can see, in this model, I've added 2 authorization rules. The first one is a rule that allows public access to any customer that goes to our customer-facing application. So they just have public read access to any restaurant information that comes back from the GraphQL API. The second authorization rule allows only admins to make changes to either restaurants or menu items that we're creating for the food delivery platform. The second model that I've created is an order model. And using that order model, a customer that is signed in, and only customers that are signed in, have the ability to actually place these orders. And I've added that as an authorization rule at the model level. What I've also done is I've added a field-level authorization rule that allows only drivers that get assigned an order to deliver to make changes to the order status field. So that means that then the customer that has placed that order is getting real-time updates about that order as it moves through the order lifecycle. And lastly, with GraphQL, you have the ability to also set up relationships between your different models. So what I've done here is I've created a relationship between the order model and the restaurant and customer model, which allows you to then also retrieve that nested data if you need it in your front-end application. And now I'm actually going to show you how you can actually build those features in an application. First, I'm going to start with initializing the Amplify project. And we mentioned that you could do that either through the CLI or visually through the AWS console. I personally prefer the CLI, so that's what I've done here. And you initialize your Amplify project from within your app directory. And I'm building the driver app, so I'm doing that from within the Flutter application. And this is the same backend that the customer-facing application that Mohit is going to be building later on is also going to be using. And as you can see, the CLI actually walks you through all of the prompts for setting up and initializing your backend. And once that's complete, the CLI then prompts you to start adding feature sets to your backend. Next, what I'm going to do is to actually add API and authentication to my backend. And to do that, I'm also using the CLI, and I'm using the Amplify add API command. And since I'm using authorization rules in order for me to granularly control access to the data, the CLI is intelligent enough to know that since you need these rules, you also need the authentication category to also be added to your backend. So the CLI takes care of walking you through the prompts to also enable the auth and API feature sets to your backend. And once that runs, now I have the ability to start actually modeling the data that I need for the food delivery platform. And the way that you do that is by going to your app directory, and then you will find that there's a new folder that was auto-generated for you called Amplify. And you'll find a schema.graphql file that you can then replace with the contents of your GraphQL schema of choice. And in this case, I'm using the same GraphQL schema that I've shown you in previous slides. Now I've set up everything that I need locally on my machine, but those changes have not yet been applied to my Amplify project in the cloud. In order to do that, you need to use the Amplify push command. And when you use the Amplify push command, all of the changes that you've set up using the CLI are then propagated to your Amplify project in the cloud. And once that runs, then all of the necessary resources that you need for your application have now been set up for you. And to prove that that actually worked, now I can actually start testing out my GraphQL APIs. And the way that you could do that is by actually going to the Amplify console and going to Amplify Studio to be able to actually test that out. So you use the Amplify console command in the terminal, which opens up Amplify Studio for you. And from there, you can go to the Data tab, and you'll see the same exact data model that I've created locally in my machine has now been synced back into your Amplify project in the cloud. And if I click on the Content tab, then you'll see here that I have access to all of the GraphQL APIs that are auto-generated for me once that schema finishes deploying. And I have admin access to all of these GraphQL APIs, so you have the ability to create, update, or delete data as you need for your application. And with that, I'm done with setting up everything that I need for my backend. Now what I'm going to talk about is new releases that we've had when it comes to building an AWS backend with Amplify. The first feature is something that I've shown in the previous video, which is now you're able to actually use Amplify Studio to query and use your auto-generated APIs that were created using GraphQL. Second, we now have a new mechanism for interacting with real-time data, which is called server-side filtering. And using server-side filtering, you have the ability to send updates only to specific users or groups, making it easier than ever to create collaborative sharing types of applications for your content or data. You also have the ability to selectively sync data back to your end-user devices, saving them network traffic or bandwidth, in addition to saving local storage on their devices as well. We've also now released in-app messaging, which is a new notification channel that allows customers to segment and trigger contextual messages for customers based on their behavior in their applications. And we also provide you with UI components that you can then use in your application to make it easier to display those contextual messages based on the user's behavior. We have received a lot of feedback from customers, such as Neiman Marcus, that really enjoy Amplify and our integrations with AppSync, specifically for empowering them to be able to be extremely agile, to be able to meet the ever-changing needs of their business. There's a question that we constantly hear from customers: is Amplify production ready? And our answer to that is the way that Amplify differentiates itself is we try to strike a balance between backend as a service providers in addition to the complete opposite of that, which is completely setting up the backend fully yourself. And when you set up a backend with Amplify, we set up all of the necessary resources that you need with default configurations that prioritize security. And now, with Amplify, you have the ability to further extend those resources that we provision for you. And when we've talked to a lot of customers, there are 3 buckets of requests that we've received in terms of extending the resources that they have with their Amplify project. The first bucket is provide me with an ability to be able to modify existing resources that you've created for me. So an example for that is AppSync, for example, or Cognito that we're using with the food delivery platform. And you can do that now with the Amplify override command. The second bucket is how can I add additional custom resources that are not natively provided by Amplify? And this is helpful for use cases where you want to pull in additional services that might be helpful for your use case so that you can really truly harness the full breadth of the 175 plus AWS services. And lastly, developers wanted a way to be able to export their Amplify backend as a CDK construct and then be able to use that with a CI/CD pipeline that they manage. And Amazon Music is a customer of Amplify that uses our export feature, allowing them to really get the best of both worlds. They can build really fast features with Amplify, and then they're able to ship their CDK construct using a CI/CD pipeline that is owned internally by their DevOps team in order to comply with their policies. And now I'm going to switch it back to Mohit for him to start building out the customer-facing app for our food delivery platform.
Awesome. Thank you, Abdullah. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is build the web app UI using some of the functionality in Amplify, which lets you build cloud-connected UI components in minutes. And we'll kind of walk through 3 ways you can do that. The first way is you can generate React components from a popular design tool called Figma. And basically, Studio can import those Figma components and generate React component code from it. If you're not familiar with Figma, we also include a built-in Figma file, which has a number of popular components like user profile, something we call Ampligram, which is like an Instagram kind of widget. And that's just provided for you, so you can alternatively just use that built-in file and those built-in components. The second way you can build UI components with Amplify is using something we launched just, I think, within the last 2 weeks, which is called Studio Form Builder. And it gives you a way either from a JSON definition or from a visual experience to build fully cloud-connected forms that you can then pull into your app again as a UI component. And then finally, we offer a variety of built-in UI components, things like Authenticator, which let you sign up and sign in into applications, as well as a few more that are coming out, I think, in the week or 2 after reInvent. So all very powerful ways of building the UI for your application. All right, so with that, let's dive into the developer experience. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Next.js application. It's kind of a starter application. Nothing yet Amplify specific. If you don't know what Next.js is, that's OK right now. Next.js extends React, and everything we're going to show here right now could be done in a vanilla React application as well. Just a few more seconds, the app is created. Once the app is created, just like with React, I can start a local dev server. And once I start the local dev server, I can launch my browser, localhost port 3000. And now whenever I make changes to my code, you'll be able to see the side-by-side impact in the browser. All right, so here we have it, a vanilla Next.js application. Now the next thing I'm going to do is connect my Next.js or React application with Amplify backend that Abdullah created using the Amplify CLI. So I did Amplify pull, specified the app ID, got prompted for a login screen, logged in, and now I can configure my local environment, saying I'm using Visual Studio Code. I can accept all the defaults around the build location. And what's happening when I run this command is 3 things underneath. The first thing, as I mentioned, is a configuration file is being generated, in this case, a JavaScript configuration file that connects my local application to the backend. In addition, any of the infrastructure as code that got created is getting pulled to my local environment. So the same infrastructure as code that Abdullah had for the Flutter app gets pulled locally. And the third thing that happens is any UI components I've built in Studio also get pulled locally, so I can include them in my application. So that's Amplify pull. Now let's go to the first experience of using a built-in UI component. Okay, so I have here a blank application, and the first thing I want to do, of course, is make sure I can sign up and sign in my app users. So to do that, I surround my app code with the Amplify Authenticator component, and you can see on the right-hand side, I now have a sign up and sign in flow that actually works. So I can, in this case, I can sign in myself, hit sign in, and now I see my blank application with a hello on the top. In addition to the component, you'll see there's some props. I get access to a user object where I can access attributes like email, and I also get access to a function called sign out where I can implement a sign out link. And I'm now signed out. The next way you can build UI is via Figma, as we talked about earlier. And in this case, because I'm personally not a designer, I just went ahead and imported the default Figma file into Studio, and you can see some of the components that we offer. For my app, I'm going to use the menu item card. And just to see that this indeed came from Figma, I can click on this UI library settings. I get a Figma link. I can go ahead and open that up in my browser. And I see the exact same components in Figma. And even as a developer, I can make some basic tweaks in here without being a Figma expert. That said, let's flip back to Studio. And now I can configure that component further in Studio. So I can define some props that I link with the labels and the item description. So I can then set those values in code. And then what I can also do is hard code some changes right here as well. So this is going to really be an add to basket kind of gesture, not an order gesture. So I can go ahead and make that change right here. Okay, once I'm done, what use is one menu item? I normally need a collection of menu items, so I can create a collection around this menu by choosing Create Collection. Give it the default name, and now I can configure the collection. So let's say instead of a list, I want a grid view. Maybe, since there could be a lot of menu items, instead of 2 columns, I want 3 columns. And then, because there could be a lot, I also want a search bar at the top, and I also want pagination. And then finally, I want to just see what this thing is going to look like, so I can punch in shuffle preview data and get a sense of what it's going to look like in my application. And now the last thing I need to do, you're going to see Amplify pull a lot in this presentation, Amplify pull, paste in a few lines to get that UI component into my app. Okay, so here we have Amplify pull. I think you're going to see Amplify pull like 5 more times in this talk. So Amplify pull pulls everything down. Okay, backend didn't change, and now it's pulling down the UI components as well. And now I can pivot back to Visual Studio Code and actually take advantage of this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and add that component, which was called Menu Item Card Collection. And then you might be wondering where, while this is showing up on the right-hand side, you might be wondering where menu items is coming from. Menu items is a GraphQL query using the Amplify GraphQL client against the backend that Abdullah just created. So you can see here, I'm going to scroll up to where we retrieved menu items. I'm making an API to GraphQL query. The query call is list menu items. And I'm authenticating my end user using Amazon Cognito. Okay. The thing on the right still looks pretty ugly because I need to populate some of those props that we defined earlier in Amplify Studio. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm going to populate the item name and item price props from those menu items, so item.name and item.price. And what's really cool is you also have the ability to override not just the items, but the components inside those items. So you see what I'm doing here is I've defined the image as an image source on a file, and I've defined the add to basket buttons as a function called save basket items. So just a few lines of kind of override code, I've been able to add all this additional functionality. Okay. And expanding the app a little bit, let's try it out. I'm more of a sashimi and sushi person than a roll person, low carb. So I'm going to add some sashimi to my cart. I'm going to add some nigiri. I'll take the meat off the rice. And now I have a nice low carb set of sushi items in my shopping cart. All right. And then the last way I can add UI to this app is the form builder. And as you might be guessing, I'm going to use the form builder to implement the checkout of my basket. Okay. As mentioned, you can create a form either visually or from JSON. I'm going to use both in this example. I'm going to start with JSON. And I happen to have the JSON definition because this is kind of the shape I want for my API anyway. So you can see here, I have a bunch of deliver to parameters, things you would expect, phone, first name, last name, stuff like that. And that's all I really need to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and press create form. And I have a form generated for me right off the bat. And you can see it's smart. So it put a space between first and name. It put a space between last and name, likewise with address. Now I'm going to visually add additional fields. So I want to enable a discount code field, so I'm going to add that visually. I can configure that as text, change the label to, say, discount space code, I believe. And I can change the variable that I access from my code from this generic field 1 to discount code, so my code is more readable. In addition, I can configure the call to action bar. So instead of submit, I want it to be more meaningful, so I want it to be place order. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to place order. And I want it to be on the top and the bottom, so there's a higher chance that I make money and people press place order. And then finally, I can make some additional changes to the form. I can add validation rules. So I can define phone as a phone number, which has a built-in validation for me. And I can add custom validations too, like I want zip code to be at least 5 digits. And in addition to all these visual validations, I can add code-based validations as well that we'll see a little later in the talk. So here I'm going to say I want it to be at least 5 characters, I believe. All right, and then the last thing I can do is I can actually rearrange some of these fields. So you can see first name and last name I wanted to put together. So I can drag and drop it to just change the look and feel as well. All right, I think folks know what's going to happen next. Amplify pull. That's going to pull down any changes to my local development environment. So in this case, it's going to be, again, no backend changes, but I'm going to get the latest form, this latest component, this submit order form component. Okay, you're going to see a flow that's very similar to what we just did. I'm going to, again, just type in a few lines of code to get that component added to my React application. So right now, when I do checkout, it's blank because the form is not there yet. Let's go ahead and replace it with that form I just built. Submit order form. And I've gone ahead and already filled in on submit and on cancel. On submit and on cancel are what you'd expect. On submit actually places the order. On cancel just goes back to the previous screen. But now I want to use some of the override capabilities to do more than this. So what I can do here is specify initial values for the properties, because I already know a lot of information about the user, like the name, the address, et cetera. I'll take gifts, by the way. I'll take money, too. And then I also can specify the text for the submit button. So in this case, I wanted to specify the basket total. And you can see that until I provided a valid phone number, it wouldn't actually let me place the order. Now that I've placed the order, a little sneak peek to what's coming. The mobile application that Abdullah's building allows the driver to get notified in real time of new orders, and then they can accept the order. Okay, so that is our web application. Just to recap, one of the new features we showed today was Amplify Studio Form Builder. It allows you to create cloud-connected forms for any API, visually and with code. And as you saw, you have the ability to use the visual builder for validations, but you also have the ability to extend those validations via code. As an example of a customer who used Amplify Studio to accelerate development, we have here a app development firm that builds apps for lots of clients. And they were able to use Amplify Studio to accelerate their development velocity. And in particular, they took advantage of the Figma to code capability. So going from Figma to JavaScript and type-safe TypeScript code. All right, now that I've built the app, I need to host the application. A show of hands, since we don't have a poll here, just how many folks have used Amplify Hosting? Okay, about 20%. So what Amplify Hosting lets you do is deploy web applications in minutes just by connecting your source-controlled repository. It's a fully managed hosting offering that until very recently was focused on single-page style applications and static applications. But again, as of a couple weeks ago, we added the ability for hybrid server-side rendered apps as well. And we'll talk about that next slide, what exactly that means. In addition to the managed hosting offering, it has a built-in CI/CD capability that uses Git flow. And what Git flow basically means is you can wire up branches to deployments in Amplify Hosting. So you can say my main branch deploys to my top-level domain. My stage branch deploys to a subdomain, et cetera. And if you've chosen to use Amplify for your backend, it will deploy your backend as well. And there's support for all the modern web frameworks, React, Next.js, Angular, Vue. We auto-detect based on looking at your configuration, what kind of app it is, and we figure out the build settings for you. Okay, so now, as promised, what exactly did we mean by hybrid server-side rendered apps? So, one of the trends we've been seeing is developers want some of their business logic to run in the app itself, like in the browser, and they want other business logic to run in the cloud, like behind an API route. Right? And another trend, and the reason you might want it to run in the cloud is to get access to a database that you don't want to expose over the internet, right? Like common use case. We also see developers saying, I want hybrid rendering. Like, why would you want hybrid rendering? Well, I want hybrid rendering maybe for my initial page load. I don't want to download a 2 megabyte JavaScript bundle. I want my initial page to be super fast, SEO friendly, so maybe I'm going to use server rendering for my initial page. But then once I get past my initial page, maybe I want a very interactive experience. So for that, without having to round trip to the cloud, so for that I would use client-side rendering. Like I would use JavaScript and I would render on the client. So that's really what Next.js provides, and that's an extension of React. And the way Amplify brings Next.js to life is with these three kind of points on the right. The first is really, it's a zero config deployment. So when you build your application, you could have in the same folder structure some code that runs on your browser. You could have other code like APIs and server-side rendering that runs in the cloud, and it can all be in the same folder structure. You wire up your Git repo, you do push, and the thing gets deployed intelligently. So the server-rendered stuff runs in the server. The cloud rendered stuff gets shipped as static files to your browser where you can then run JavaScript. The next thing that Amplify Hosting does to bring server-side rendering to life is it makes it easy to integrate with backends. So we've updated our client libraries, things like Amplify Auth, Amplify API, so you can use the exact same code both in the browser as well as in the cloud. And you're going to see an auth example in a minute where I use Amplify Auth to get the context of the logged in user and then make a call, in this case a fake call, but make a call against the database using the context of the logged in user. And then finally, CloudWatch integration is built in. And that includes both CloudWatch metrics as well as CloudWatch logs, so you can observe and troubleshoot your application. It's 2 clicks to start the video. Yes, OK. So let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to flip to the hosting environment part of the backend that Abdullah just created. Choose GitHub, get a list of all my GitHub repositories, pick the one for the app that I just built, and hit Next. As you can see, we auto-detected that the front end of this application is Next.js, the back end is Amplify. And because I want to link it to the back end, there's one extra step here where I pick the backend environment staging, and I have to pick a service role. If I don't have a backend, this step is not there at all. But in this case, because I want my front end to talk to the backend, I need a service role. And you can see everything was auto-detected for me. I hit Next. I can confirm all the settings, and that's it. In about 2.5 minutes, so we've improved deployment time significantly, the app is deployed. In addition to just deploying the app, I can configure custom domains. And I can configure custom domains using Route 53 in a one-click way, or I can use the domain registrar of my choice. And then finally, as mentioned, all the CloudWatch functionality is available, and it's just built into the console, so I can see all of my CloudWatch metrics, like time to first byte. And I can see the logs for the managed compute offering that powers those cloud capabilities like APIs and server-side rendering. Okay, so now just to see that it's real, I'm going to go ahead and click on this link, which I believe is the next video. Okay. Yep, go ahead and click on this link. You'll see that same application I was working on is now deployed. But we have a problem. The problem is these images are huge. So my drag and roll image is indeed a dragon. It's like 5 megabytes. And that's not acceptable when it comes to delivering a great experience to our customers. So what I'm going to do now is take advantage of that cloud piece of functionality with just a line of code. So I'm going to change the default image tag to the Next.js image tag. And what the Next.js image tag is going to do is instead of serving the image directly from S3, it's going to serve it via Amplify Hosting, which is going to optimize the image. It's going to compress it and then serve it back to the end user. You might be wondering, well, that kind of seems like a bad idea. Like S3 is why would you add a middle tier when serving images? The reason why is it is an extra compute step initially, but then all the images get cached at the edge in CloudFront. And you'll see here indeed that the image is now a lot smaller. I believe my eyes can't see what it says, but I believe it was 15 or 16K. And you can see it's being routed through Amplify Hosting, but subsequent requests would be served from CloudFront at the edge. So that's a really great example of how you can blend browser and cloud capabilities to make the app better. The last use case we're going to talk about is those API routes. So what we've done here now is you can deploy an API simply by creating an API folder and putting code in that API folder. As promised, you can use the same Amplify commands, things like Amplify configure. Once you do Amplify configure, you get access to the auth object. You can call current authenticated user to get access to the user context. And here I have a very contrived example, but in real life it would be a database where I check to see that the user is a very specific user, and I hard code it to say we only allow discount code of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it has to be my user ID, and I only allow discount code of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I can go back to that form And I can call that API using an additional override that the form provides, which is onValidate. And you can see here I've set to validate discount code, I want to call this API. Based on that response, I'm going to say it's successful or not successful. So let's go back to our browser after I commit. Let's go back to our browser, and now you'll see if I type in an invalid discount code, it knows it's me, and it says, hey, that's invalid. But I can alternatively type in the correct discount code, and it succeeds. All right, as an example of a customer who uses Amplify Hosting, we have Noom. And what Noom did is really interesting. They have a content management system, and what they use is whenever the content is updated, they trigger a webhook, which then triggers a build in Amplify Hosting and generates a bunch of static content. So they get really dynamic experience, but without having to hit the content management system for their live content. All right, with that, I'm going to hand back to Abdullah to build the Flutter application.
We should have really figured out a cool way to do these handoffs, like wrestlers, like tapping each other in or something, but lesson learned for next time. So we've talked a lot about building an AWS backend. And Mohit has showed you a lot about building UI components and using all of the different functionality that we have available, like our connected UI components and our new forms capability. I'm also going to be talking here about how to use the Amplify libraries. And using the Amplify libraries, you have the ability to connect to AWS resources that were either provisioned by Amplify, either through our CLI or through Amplify Studio. And all of these Amplify libraries are use case centered. So you have the ability then to be able to use features like auth, API, or file storage. And the APIs are declared in a way that make it really easy for you to be able to use these features. And with these Amplify libraries, we have a wide array of support. We support web applications. We support native mobile, so that includes Swift applications in addition to Android apps, and cross-platform applications for Flutter and React Native. Now I'm going to actually start building feature sets into my driver application that we're using for our food delivery platform, starting with authentication. I'm going to follow in Mohit's footsteps and also use the Authenticator UI component for Flutter. I first add my dependencies, and then after I add my dependencies, I go to my main entry point file to my application, and I replace that with a code snippet that we have available in our documentation. And then I can run my application. And when I run my app, you'll see that I have a sign-in and sign-up form that works for you out of the box. I've already created a user previously, so what I can do now is I can sign in. And after I sign in, the Authenticator allows you to then direct your users to whichever page or widget that you need for your application. And then if you sign out, or if your user signs out using your application, then the Authenticator also handles routing the user back to the main sign-in form of the Authenticator. So all of that route guarding, the Authenticator handles for you automatically. Next, I'm going to integrate GraphQL API into the application. The first thing that I need to do is add my dependencies into for my Flutter application. And I'm going to first start with showing you the end result of the application. So after I sign in, I'm then going to be directed into the main screen of the driver app, which has two tabs. The first tab is for orders that are assigned to me as a driver, but are incomplete. And the second tab has orders that are assigned to me that are complete. And if I click on any of those orders, then I can see the details of the items in that order. And if I click on the address button, then I can go directly to my default Maps application that's available for me on the device in order for me to be able to then actually navigate and deliver the order. And all that I needed to do here is add the imports that I need to my application, configure the API feature set in my application, and then I'm using two functions here. The first one allows me to get the list of all orders that are assigned to me and are actually complete. And then the second function allows me to then get the list of all of the orders that are assigned to me but are incomplete. And you can see these method names could be named a lot better. So pro tip, never let product managers name your methods. That's bad idea. And then after I get the results back from these functions, I can then render the results of that into my widgets and display the experience that I've shown you into the Flutter application. Now I want to talk about what's new with connecting to an AWS backend with Amplify. First, which I've shown you in the previous video, the Flutter libraries have now expanded support for web and desktop. This is something that a lot of customers have been asking us for. Previously, you had the ability only to build for iOS and Android applications using Flutter, and now you have the ability to build to up to 6 platforms using the Flutter libraries, which include iOS, Android, web, macOS, Linux, and Windows. Our iOS libraries have been rewritten completely in Swift, allowing Swift developers to benefit from a lot of idiomatic practices, such as the use of async await, and also allowing us to extend support for iOS libraries to deploy to Mac OS as well as a target platform. Our Android libraries have been rewritten on top of the Kotlin SDKs, allowing us to introduce additional enhancements to our storage and auth feature sets. And lastly, which I've shown in the previous video, we now have the Authenticator UI component available for both Flutter and React Native, allowing you to build an authentication experience out of the box with 10 lines of code. And what's really great about the Authenticator is that it's also fully customizable. So if you want to make changes to the Authenticator to match your design or brand guidelines, then you have the ability to do that. And with this, all of the features that we need for our food delivery platform are complete. We can definitely benefit from hiring a designer, but yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Mohit.
We have a little more. We're not done yet. I mean, we don't mind mid-talk applause, but we have a little more. All right, so this is the last part. As promised, we just wanted to show you what happened underneath. So when Abdullah built out the backend, we got that architecture that you see on the right. And the key thing to take away is these are resources that get provisioned in the customer's account. So it's very different from like a backend as a service kind of offering. These resources actually end up in the customer's account. Now let's see how they're actually exercised. So for the customer application, the first step, of course, is to get the web assets. Until 2 weeks ago, getting web assets from Amplify Hosting meant getting static web assets. But as of our recent launch, it can also mean running some code in a managed compute environment that then, in our case, went to S3, retrieved the image, optimized it, and sent it back. So web assets are served by Amplify Hosting either as static, as static files being returned to the application, or as compute that runs and performs a task like image optimization or API routes. Once that's done, the authenticator component enabled the end user to log into the application using Cognito. And then they were able to make a call to AppSync to browse menus and make orders. Maybe what was less clear is there was also a real-time component. And the real-time component was providing updates to their order status. But the real-time status, this kind of real-time functionality was using a feature we call server-side runtime filtering to make sure that only real-time events for that user, for that customer, get sent to them. So I wouldn't be seeing Abdullah's orders, for example. Likewise, on the driver side, same architecture. In this case, because it's a mobile, a Flutter app is a native mobile app at the end of the day, Amplify Hosting is not in the picture. Instead, the app just gets installed on the device. Once the app is installed, again, authentication and sign-up happens with Amazon Cognito. The driver then can go to AppSync when they start their application and see what orders are assigned to me. And then finally, using that same new runtime filtering capability with filtering, they'll get real-time updates only to the orders assigned to them, not orders that are assigned to anybody else. And while I didn't show this, AppSync's runtime filtering capability is pretty flexible, so you can trigger what's called a mutation in AppSync to do custom events as well back to the user. All right, so with that, I've now arrived to my last slide, which is a repeat of one of our earlier slides, just to recap what we've learned about today. We walked through how you can use the parts of Amplify together, but again, you can use them on your own. We built an AWS backend in a use case-centric way with Amplify CLI. We then built the web app UI using a combination of 3 tools, the Figma to React piece, the form builder, and built-in UI components. We then hosted the application using Amplify Hosting, taking advantage not just of static hosting, but actually managed compute offering that's now part of Amplify Hosting for server use cases like API routes and server-side rendering. And then finally, Abdullah showed how you can connect to that backend using libraries and UI components. And again, we could have done these pieces on their own as well, using the libraries and UI components against an existing backend, Amplify Hosting on its own. In our talk, we used it all together. With that, we are done. And now we'll take applause.